Okay, so the first horror film I ever saw was The Exorcist. Um, it was that film that you always heard about, people fainting in the cinema, um, being feeling ill after watching it. So basically, as a group of mates in high school, we decided to get together and give it a watch. Instantly, just loved the film. Um, I would say that it wasn't where my love of horror actually started. I continued to watch horror films, but I have to admit that it's only in, say, my late teens, early 20s, that's when my love of horror really started. Um, Now it's just a full blown obsession. But yeah, Exorcist was the first film I ever watched. So if we're going to talk about the best decade, um, for me it's the 80s. It's when there was people were having fun with horror films. People were having fun in general. Music changed. Other films, other film genres, they started to like enjoy themselves more with like the special effects. And yeah, horror. It just kind of became this thing of whatever you want to do. Um, there was going to be an audience for it. Whatever your dream was, what you wanted to see. Um, if you wanted to see an overly gory film, if you wanted to see a different take on something like supernatural, or like one of the, if you want to call them like the original horror films, where you've got like the likes of Dracula, you've got the likes of like Frankenstein. So there was a lot of different takes on those types of films as well. It was just an exciting decade, and yeah, that's. I did think, would I say the 70s, because the back end of the 70s, that's when you got a lot of these really amazing films start to come out. But yeah, it really like took off in the 80s. So favorite director, it to me it's got to be the master of horror. It's John Carpenter all the way. Um, there's so many amazing directors out there, but yeah, for me, he directs, he does everything, even down to not being satisfied with wanting to have the responsibility of putting a score together for anyone else. Yeah, he has a vision, and he makes sure that that is executed. So yeah, he's absolutely amazing. Um, I do have to say though, in recent years, I've become a really big fan of Mike Flanagan, who he's the guy behind like the Haunting of series. He also did things like Gerald's Game. He actually got given Doctor Sleep as well. And one of my favourite horrors in recent years from him was Hush. It was like the home invasion film. Um, that is definitely worth a watch for anyone who hasn't seen it. But yeah, John Carpenter all the way, but special mention to Mike Flanagan. Suspense or gore. Now I'm massive. I love watching really gory films. Um, I, yeah, I enjoy looking at and thinking how they've put it together, the special effects. Massive fan of like practical effects. I think there's a lot of love that goes into things like that. Big fan of Tom Savini, but suspense is the most important thing in horror. Um, that's where the story comes from. That's what carries the story. If you haven't got suspense in the film, then you've just got mindless violence, which is good. I do enjoy that. But yeah, suspense is more important than gore. Now, when I first started watching horror films, the ones that we could get our hands on, me and like mates, they were all on VHS. So I do love watching it on a VHS, like the grainy quality and things like that. Um, but DVD, that for me is that wins hands down. Um, it allowed you to get more out of the film. You've got like the director's cut, you've got the special features, extended editions. So yeah, as a horror fan, you're always wanting that little bit extra, and that's what DVD did for us. So yeah, it's got to be DVD. I'm not a massive. I don't think I like watching things on Blu-ray. The quality's amazing, but I'm not a fan of it. I don't think it's needed with horror films. That's more your action films, things with the millions and millions of dollars of special effects in, um, like the CGI and things like that. Yeah, it's. I don't think Blu-ray's that important. I never really bought into it. So yeah, definitely DVD. So favorite slasher film, um, for me, it's definitely Halloween. It's not consistently brilliant throughout the entire franchise, but there's no one more iconic than Mike Myers. Don't get me wrong, I love the Friday the 13th films, and there's some absolutely brilliant slashers that have come out in recent years. Special mention to um, Terrifier. I think Art the Clown is one of the most scary monsters that I've seen in recent years, and I can't wait for the next one to come out. Um, Hopefully, it'll get into production soon, but we never know. But yeah, it's got to be Halloween because there's no one more iconic than him when it comes to slashers. Favorite zombie film? For me, it's Night of the Living Dead. Um, that and some might argue differently, but Romero, for me, wrote the zombie lore. He he gave inspiration. He gave basically the stuff to work with for people who've carried on making zombie films since. The film as well, it's well layered. It's not just a horror film. It's one of those holding a mirror up to society. Um, who are the monsters, the zombies, or the humans? Um, and obviously, you get that really iconic line, "They're coming to get you, Barbara." Uh, so yeah, it's definitely Night of the Living Dead. Favorite monster? Um, there's a few that you would say are the more iconic ones, but for me, it's definitely Frankenstein's monster. The story itself, he didn't choose to be here. He was created by Dr. Frankenstein. And as soon as he was made, he was basically cast aside, and it's the circumstances, it's what happened to him made him become this monster. And I mean, I'm not a big reader, but that is one of like the classic horror books that I've actually read, and I've actually read it a couple of times and really enjoyed it. And each time I read over it, it gives me a little bit more from the story. Again, for horror films, there's been some absolutely brilliant uh, like horror films based around Frankenstein. So you go from the original stuff. You've got like Bride of Frankenstein, but then you've even got like Mel Brooks making a parody of the story, and that is one of my favourite Mel Brooks films as well. So yeah, for me, it's definitely Frankenstein. favourite horror artist, as I said earlier on, the 80s was the decade for me. The 80s, you've got Graham Humphreys. He was at the helm of so many of the most iconic artworks that were produced. Um, yeah, even down to like the Evil Dead poster that he created when it first came out. Just the artwork's absolutely amazing. I was luckily enough in recent weeks to interview the guy, and I'd met him a couple of years ago at a convention, and he's an absolute gent. He's a really nice guy, really modest, no airs and graces about him. He just he does his work. He does, yeah. You can see the love that he puts into it, and he's a big horror fan himself. He's not just doing like commission pieces, um, just because it's his job. He absolutely loves the horror genre himself, and that really comes through in his work. Why horror? Um, for me, it's a, it's about community. I mean, don't get me wrong. I love the films, the adrenaline rush when you're watching the films, looking for that next thing, looking for the next take on like an old story. But for me, the horror community is something really special. You go to like the conventions, so many cool people to speak to, and it's when you find these like-minded people who love these absolutely disgusting and scary films. Um, Once you get together and start talking about those things, then it's really something quite special. Um, I personally don't get excited about many of the like genres of films. I love some like sci-fi. I'm a big comedy fan. Love Star Wars. That's what one of my big loves. But for me, when you hear about that new film coming out, when you hear of something that's not been touched for years, and then you get wind that they're going to be making a new one of it, um, just finding something new as well. That's that's what's exciting about horror. So yeah, and just seeing what people can actually do with a story. So for me, it's my love for horror. It does come from the community side of things, and yeah, it's definitely community.